This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. Well, don't forget to join me on Instagram Live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. This is a 15-minute chat, PR talk from the PR Garage, we call it. Everybody knows it. That's where I operate out of, is the PR Garage. And we talk about what's going on in PR. Maybe we talk about some breaking news. We play a game called Why Is That News, where I take a story out of my local newspaper or TV station or what have you, and I sort of break it down and give my impression about why I think that got covered as a news story. Would love to hear your recommendations, a local story from where you live, to plug into there and play that game. Why is this news? But short story is, join me every Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern on Instagram Live on my personal handle. That's at Jody Fisher. And let's talk about PR talk from the PR Garage. Now on with our show today, we got a great guest. Alexson Calahan is a nonprofit and chronic disease PR expert, guiding health organizations and independent consultants to create memorable and actionable stories in the media. Her work has helped change legislation, raise millions of dollars for mission-driven health behavior change, and brought fresh participants and donors to the largest health nonprofits in the world. We love that kind of ROI, right? With Small Adventures Communications, Alexson brings her expertise to NPOs of all sizes and works with independent consultants to grow their business through media positioning. Alexson, welcome to the PR Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being on. Now, I work in nonprofit, you work in nonprofit. We all know that nonprofits need to, as I say, make every dollar dance like it's 10, right? They have to pull every last drop of resources out of everything they can get. Yet their missions are probably among the most critical in our communities. Tell me about your experience with nonprofits and specifically with nonprofit PR.
Yeah, absolutely. So these days, I run my own business, Small Adventures Communications, and we focus a lot on working with nonprofit organizations, mostly in scientific and public health spaces. But before I started that business 3 years ago, I spent the bulk of my career on staff at the American Heart Association running national PR for what is called patients and conditions. So if you heard in the news about heart attacks, stroke, AFib, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, that was me. And I've worked at other nonprofits as well. I've only done short stints in agencies. So my whole 20-year career has been built in nonprofits, and I absolutely adore it. I know that it's such a special group of people, I think, that are willing to work that hard and just kind of go against the odds, have to be super, like you said, scrappy and resourceful and pull everything together to get a great outcome for not just like the mission that they're working towards, but for the diverse group of stakeholders that they've got, employees, staff, the people they serve, donors, sponsors, all of those good things. So it's a unique space, and I absolutely adore the challenges that it brings.
It is great. And for, an old radio reporter like me, it seems to be a never-ending source of great stories about people, about working communities, about, the way I like to think of it is, stuff that makes our lives better, stuff that makes our communities better. News reporters are always going to cover the breaking news, the fires and the court cases and all that kind of stuff that you hear about all the time. They really want to hear about those kind of stories that come out of nonprofits, right? The life-changing, maybe heartstring tugging kind of stuff. And also the stuff that's really important in terms of information, in terms of education. How do you pursue storylines with some of your not-for-profit clients, and maybe specifically going all the way back to the American Heart Association?
Well, I always say that we are only as good as our impact and our stories when we're talking about nonprofit PR. It is so important to not rely on others to feed you those good stories. So when you are being strategic about your public relations and you know what you want your PR to do for you, what goals, specific goals you need to be moving towards that mission, and can then kind of find the stories that really illustrate that need or that impact of a program, that's so important. So really working closely with the folks who the organization serves or who are really on the ground, knowing those folks and making sure that the stories that you share are told in a really respectful way. So, that's something that's always been really important to me is making sure that when I'm sharing somebody's story, especially because so many of the stories I've shared are health stories, so it's really personal. It's like very vulnerable of these people to share their story in an effort to move a mission forward. And it's just so important to make sure that you're treating them with that dignity and respect, making sure that there's consent on every level as you're moving forward with the story, that you're using the right words for them and also the right words that are going to, inspire action, like you said, because it's not just about here's a heartwarming story, look what this nonprofit can do. It's using that as a kind of micro example of the impact that could be had with broader resources, which is what it's all about, really. So just kind of bringing people into your movement with these illustrations.
Yeah, 100% agree with what you're saying there. Let's drill down a little bit on the working with people on sharing their personal story. Because it's one thing to say, hey, we got a nonprofit, they do this kind of work. The reporter always comes back and says, okay, give me the tangible example. Give me as the medical reporters say, give me the patient story, right?
Yep.
Give me the example of the person. And as PR people, we have to show that. How do you, but that can be challenging, right? Because you're asking people to be vulnerable, to share their story. And sometimes it can be extraordinarily private information. I work with a nonprofit, as an example, that does domestic violence work, right? And you're asking people to share their experience with domestic violence. That's hard.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that with your clients and with the people that they serve to pull those stories out? What are some tips that you use?
So I think it's really important to establish trust, just like we are always as PR people wanting to establish trust with like our journalist friends, we want to make sure that we're establishing trust with the people whose story we want to share as well. Typically, I don't ever really pull stories, no matter how perfect they might be. I am looking for people who are raising their hand and saying, yes, I'm ready to share this story, because going in, with something like domestic violence or a health issue, when it's too fresh, too fragile, not ready to be shared, and you're kind of making somebody do that, that story is never going to come across just right. Because you have to be willing to share that story and also be willing to be coached on sharing that story so that it's not a 20-minute rambling of every health problem you've ever had, but it's condensed, it's concise, it makes sense, and it drives towards the larger message that the organization is hoping to share with folks. So the first piece of advice, the first tip I have is to definitely have that trust, have those relationships. If you as a PR person don't, directly work in the areas that are like really service providing for a nonprofit organization, talk to the people who are and see if they've got ideas of folks who are willing to share their stories. And then just get out there and meet them, because you want them to trust you as well, because you are really the steward of their stories. And it's so important that you've got that. Yeah, it's so important that you've got that trust built, because you're going to be helping to shape and guide how they share their really vulnerable, really private information out there. But it's hard. I totally recognize that's one of the hardest parts of telling a nonprofit story, is building that bank of that library of stories. But never had too many stories is what I always say. Like, it's good to have that big bank, so that you can have all sorts of examples ready to go when you need it.
You saw me react to that phrase that you used, the steward of stories. And I love that perspective, because I think that's what we are as publicists, as PR professionals, is yes, we dig in and we find the stories and we do the work and we get into the nitty gritty and we're back and forth with reporters and all that kind of, worried about the headline and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, though, we are as you put it, we are the steward of someone's story. And it's our job to help the reporters get it right. Because especially when you're talking about someone who perhaps is sharing private or personal information about their experience, a bad experience can just be heartbreaking for them, beyond anything that has to do with how many impressions there were or what newspaper it was in or anything else. It's like they're exposing themselves.
Right.
And if the media even accidentally get it wrong, it's just gut-wrenching, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've really got to work to especially in cases where those are the types of stories that we're sharing. Like we're working to not just get the messaging right and land the key points, land the call to action, land the mention, get the logo included, all that stuff. But we're also working to really protect and advocate for those people who are sharing their stories, because it is so much more than just a heartwarming story for the sake of a heartwarming story. Because so often, when you're working in nonprofits, these are the stories that are moving legislation. Like they are the stories that are bringing, research news to the people that they can act on to improve their health. Like this is, it's all part of something larger. So keeping that as just another thing to juggle in the PR mind is really important.
Juggling flaming chainsaws, as I refer to it. Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
right.
exactly.
Like we don't have enough to do.
Right, exactly. You talked a little bit about sort of the ROIs, the calls to action, right? Whether that's raising money, writing legislation, or getting any other kind of an outcome. Are there certain stories that work best to achieve those particular outcomes, or how do you go through the process, maybe, of working with a nonprofit client to identify the details of a given story to then affect the outcome or the ROI that they want?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And I love going through this process with my nonprofit clients. It's one of my favorite things because you can really see things go from an abstract mission related goal into something very tangible and into an article or a feature story. So we always start with what that mission goal is. It's like any other business, right? We're looking at what the goal is. We're going to build a strategy towards that goal. So we do the same thing in nonprofit PR. We're looking at what the mission goal is, what the PR strategy can be around it, and then we're kind of building. I use a framework I call the ACT framework because I know PR is all about like warming the room, building relationships, but we also want to drive people to action, right? So this ACT framework is kind of how I build out these stories. So that A is for awareness. That's where we kind of start by sharing that we recognize there's an issue, right? And a lot of times in like my past life of being at the American Heart Association, what I would plug in there would be a statistic, that so many people are suffering from cardiovascular disease or so many people will experience a stroke, kind of illustrating the global issue of a problem that we're aware of. Then you go into C, which is for credibility. And that's where we really share a story. And the most important part is to share a story that is reflective of that stat or that, problem statement, so that you're just kind of bringing people into the story, right? So here's this big issue. Here's the number. Like, statistics don't mean anything to people, but when you can illustrate it with a story, that's really great. And then we go into T, which is where the call to action is together. Here's how we can move forward. And that's where you make it really clear that with additional support or with additional action on behalf of whoever's watching the broadcast or reading the article, we can make an impact on this initial problem statement. So it's having that common thread, like there's no like magic bullet, right? That's a perfect story every time. It's different for each goal, but having an awareness that you can't just throw out any old story, or the best story, might not be a fit for what the goal is. You got to make sure that you're really pairing those for the most effective outcome. Yeah.
Those are all great points. And that's exactly what we do, right? We take the raw materials of the story and we fit it. Not only do we create the story, but we also fit it to the right outlet, the right reporter. And as you said, kind of make sure that we're pulling out the right call to action and the right result that we want to achieve based on all that criteria.
Yeah, it's all about just like telling that full story and getting people aware of an issue, engaged, emotionally invested, and then wanting to take whatever that next step is to take action.
How do you coach your clients, maybe who are a little nervous doing an interview with a reporter? Especially nonprofits, they may hire someone like us to say, "Hey, we want to get out there. We want to get some attention. We've got some stories we want to tell. We got some things we want to achieve." But they've never worked with reporters, or they've worked with reporters once and they got burned, or whatever the case may be. How do you walk them through the actual interaction with a reporter?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. That's a huge passion point of mine. In addition to doing this work with nonprofits, I actually do a specialized coaching for introverted entrepreneurs. So kind of like that, I don't really want to do this type of feeling, and finding a way to make you feel comfortable with it. So in terms of media training, like we definitely talk through the process, like how, kind of like you do on your Instagram Live, how does news become news, right? So understanding that first is really important. Like, where is this news coming from? What is exciting to a journalist? What would they want to cover? Then we go through and we do, media training basics, how to breathe, how to pivot, how to bridge, how to make sure that you're presenting yourself well on camera, all that good stuff. I do love to do practice sessions whenever possible with folks, because I think recording yourself back and watching it, pretending like you were really on the news just now, can be enlightening and sometimes a little terrifying, definitely motivating. So we do that. And then I also work really, really hard. And this is so, I think, important, whether you are a patient sharing a personal story, or an introverted entrepreneur, or a nonprofit leader who's not really into talking to the media, not comfortable with it yet. When you are comfortable with your messaging, and when you're prepared well for that up front, and you've prepared not just the things you want to proactively say, but things that you can, ways that you can bridge, ways you can respond to some of those tricky questions, or questions that you don't quite know the answer to, for whatever reason, having that confidence and having that prep time and prep work and practice can really increase your confidence so much, because nobody wants to walk in and wing it. Like, very few people are going to walk in, wing it, and do a great job. So it's all about making sure that you're solid on the messaging, proactive and reactive, so that when it's filtered through the media in whatever way, that you are still coming across with your strong messaging.
Love that. Love that. Giving people confidence. I typically tell clients, especially in sort of like a good news kind of a situation, I remind them that the reporter, in a way, is rooting for them. Even though they're asking factual questions, they need real factual answers, and they're going to push them to get that information. They still also need them to deliver that good story. They want to hear that thing that no one else can say, and they need them to give them that, because if they don't give them that, they don't have a story to report.
Yeah.
And sometimes my clients will be like, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." They always think that, a reporter is going to be like someone they see on Scandal, or someone they see in pop culture, which is totally
Yes.
not, you and I know, totally not
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah. You got to be ready, because you never know. Sometimes there are sneaky sneaks, but it's
Absolutely.
like,
Yeah.
but yeah, by and large, like, you can spot those coming, and like, as communications professionals, like, we should know our organizations or our clients well enough to be able to know where those snakes might be heading. Like, be ready
Yeah,
for
for
it.
sure.
But yeah.
For sure. Just final question as we wrap up our conversation here. Where do you see, working with nonprofits as clients now, and working so extensively in the nonprofit world for so long? Um, you know, Economy is what it is. Life is what it is. Where do we see the nonprofit industry going? Certainly, it's not going away, but it always seems to be on, let's say, hard times. Are the times getting harder? The times getting easier? And how can people like you and I help those nonprofits that we work with?
I think that as people who have made their careers in nonprofits are finding ways to collaborate more, and finding ways to advocate for themselves a little bit more. I know there's so much work being done around, like, paying fair salaries to nonprofit workers, and making sure that the resources that they have are right in line with their corporate counterparts, because these jobs and the missions of these organizations are so important. So I think there are brighter days ahead for the nonprofit industry as a whole. I think that, as I like to say that if every nonprofit had like a well-resourced communications team, the world would be such a different place, because all like like there's so much power in what we do in public relations, and it's not a lack of talent. It's not a lack of passion that's, like, kind of keeping some of these missions from being achieved. It's a lack of resources in so many cases. So I think there's good stuff coming, and I think it's only going to be more important. There's always a space for folks ready to make the world a better place.
Agree with you there. We can always use more better place warriors, as
Yes.
it were. Alexson Calahan, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for spending time with us here. We're not going to let you go yet, though. We are going to segue now into the rapid fire question portion of our podcast. This is where we steal a page from inside the actor's studio. We ask our guests a series of rapid fire questions meant to elicit a simple answer, maybe a laugh or two. With your indulgence, Alexson Calahan, Let's begin with rapid fire question number one. What's your favorite news source?
I'm an NPR girl.
Love it. Love it. Where are you in the country, by the way? I didn't ask up front.
Oh, that's all right. I am based in beautiful central Iowa.
In Iowa. Okay, terrific,
Yes.
terrific.
Yeah.
Well, you're gonna be busy in the upcoming months. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Rapid fire question number two. What's your favorite social media platform?
LinkedIn is my preferred channel these days. I just
Okay.
love
Okay. Rapid fire
I've met
question.
so many amazing people through it. So it's been great.
You do, and you know what I find is more. I'll use the word strangers just because that's the first word that came to mind. But relevant strangers,
Yeah, friendly strangers.
like not people that are like you go on like a place like TikTok and it's like, what am I looking at? Don't get me wrong, it's entertaining. But
Yeah.
like, what am I looking at? You go on LinkedIn and it's like, oh, that person's interesting. That person's interesting.
Yeah, it's nice. I always love to put a real human face on like people who I admire, people who are doing amazing work. So it's nice to feel like I can start to build connections with folks that are doing cool work.
Sounds good to me. Rapid fire question number three: coffee or alcohol? What are we drinking in Iowa?
We are drinking neither. We are drinking the mushroom coffee alternatives. Those are good.
Oh, are they?
Have you
see all
tried
these
them?
ads for them. Yeah. No,
I
I
got
haven't.
suckered in. It worked on me, and
Okay.
it's delicious. It's like a bitter hot chocolate.
All right. Hey, I like hot chocolate. That sounds good. Rapid
Yeah.
fire question number four: what's your favorite on the run food?
I like Jimmy John's sandwiches. Easy, cheap, sort of fresh, sort of healthy.
Love that. Rapid fire question number five: what do you want to be after you finish this career?
Honestly, I love what I do. I cannot imagine doing anything else, even in my old age. Although I'll just put it out into the universe that I would not mind being one of those people at Disney World that cleans up the trash and then does the little water art, draws the little Mickey faces. You know what I'm talking
Yes,
about? Crisp
I
white
have seen
uniform.
that.
I would love that. So, hit me up in like 30 years, Disney.
All right. That sounds good. Well, Alexson, this has been a great conversation. Please let people know how they can find you online.
Yes, so my business website is smalladventurescommunications.com, and I've got all sorts of resources there for folks. Or you can find me on my favorite social media platform, which is LinkedIn, and yeah, I'm wide open over there.
Sounds good. We'll put all the links in the show notes. Thanks again, Alexson, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at The PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. Our intro is by Christopher Apple. You can find him and his fantastic photography on Instagram at Christopher_APPOLDT. Check him out there and hire him for all your photography needs. You can find me online at Jody Fisher on all the socials and on the web at jodyfisherpr.com. We'll see you next time on the PR Podcast.